Seirigin here on Daf Yud Chesam base Seirisin lo yotze. What's Seirisin? So Seirisin is what we call a mafreya. You'll take a look at Rashi on the top of the Omer. Remember, we said if you read it out of sequence, you read the next pasuk before the previous pasuk. You out of order. You're not yotze. Rab Muna Omer Mishum Rab Yehuda Af B'Seirigin. There's no blanket, absolute statement that if you stop with interruptions, you're yotze. Im shah kedei ligmars kula chozel rosh. If he interrupts himself with a pause in which he can read the Megillah, we'll see what that means. Then that interruption breaks up the continuity from the previous reading to the next reading, and therefore chozel rosh has to start from the beginning again. Rav Yosef, halacha Rabbi Muna, Sha'am Rishon Rabbi Yehuda, which means that in the case of Shah Kedei Ligmar's Kula Lo Yotze, Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef. What does that mean, Kedei Ligmar's Kula? And he offers two possibilities. Number one is Mehecha de Koil Seifa. He's up to the 8th chapter, so he has to figure. He has to go on with another 2 chapters, whatever. So how long would it take him to read the balance of the Megillah? Or Dilma, perhaps be racial to say, how long would it take him to read the entire Megillah? We have to have an absolute objective standard of interruption. How long is an interruption? And it can't change because you're up to Perek Aleph and then you interrupted Perek Zayin, Perek Tes, whatever Perek you're up to. And that's called Lo Nitnu Dvarech Al Shiur. We don't give shiur. This is a little bit of a problem for me because it seems that Rabbi Yosef is recommending the other interpretation of Abai, that it's the amount of time it would take you to read the entire Megillah, but that's also Nitnu Dvarech Al Shiur. I know someone who can read the Megillah in 8 minutes. I know someone who can do a Daf Yomi in 8 minutes. There is such a guy. It's quite popular too.
The Greek, right?
And in Greek for the Greeks. One of our chevra here told me he reads the Megillah in 20 minutes. I know people take 30 minutes. So that's also l'shiurim. I don't know exactly how Rav Yosef solved this problem. In any event, halacha ki Rabbi Muna. That means that if you took a break in the Megillah and it was long enough to read the Megillah, you're not yotze. Ushmuel Amar ein halacha ki Rabbi Muna, which means no matter how long you took a break, you could continue, pick up where you left off, and you're yotze in the mitzvah Megillah. Besura masnei hachi, bepupedusa masnei hachi. The way we have it here, and that's what we read the Lishna Kama, that reflects Surah, but in Pupedisa, they changed the names a little bit. Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav, Halacha Rabbi Muna. So it's not Rabbi Abba in the name of Rav, but rather it's Rav Kahana in the name of Rav. Ushmuel Amar Ein Halacha Rabbi Muna. But that's identical. Rabbi Bibi Masni Ibcha, he has Rav Amar Ein Halacha ki Rabbi Muna, which we added the name of Shmuel. No, it was Rav who says Ein Halacha Rabbi Muna. Ushmuel Amar Halacha Rabbi Muna. And if Shmuel is constantly like Rabbi Muna, then we have a chumrah. Rav is saying Ein Halacha Rabbi. You can interrupt and there'll be a hefsek fine no matter how long it is. Shmuel is saying no, there's a limit. On Rav Yosef the code to Rabbi Bibi Yodcha. We should have the girsa of Rabbi Bibi because then Shmuel's l'chumrah, and that is typical and consistent with Shmuel. The Shmuel who dechai shlichita. Shmuel, as a general rule, always takes into consideration the individual, the minority opinion, if it's l'chumrah. And here's a case where we have a chumrah that it could be the l'serigin loyot. Now, where do you find that Shmuel takes up the position and Paskins, rules like that, dissenting individual minority view, because that expresses l'chumrah? Well, we see it in Shomeres Yomi. It's now we went to the Mishnah in Yevamos, Shomeres Yomi shekidesh achav esachosa. What happens is that when a woman falls for Yibum, then the brothers, the Yavamim, as we call them, are not allowed to marry relatives, close relatives of the Yavama, because that would make it impossible for them to perform Yibum. So, for example, let's say Ashes Ruvain falls the Yibum to Shimon. Shimon's not allowed to, and we'll say that Ashes Ruvain is Rachel. Shimon is not allowed to marry Leah, the sister of Rachel, because if he does so, he won't be able to be Miyamim Rachel. Not only that, if you hold Yesh Zika, it means that there's already the beginning of a marriage relationship here between Ruvain and Rachel. So then he's not allowed to marry Leah because Leah is Achos Ishto. Technically, it's called Achos Kukasa. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, that Omrim lo hamteina chiyasa chicha gadol mais. If let's say there are two brothers who are Yavamim, right? There were three brothers, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Reuben died, and now Reuben's wife falls to both Shimon and Levi. And Shimon went ahead and he performed a marriage of what's called the Erisin. And the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, we're going to have to tell him that he cannot consummate the marriage. Why? Because right now she is related to you because we're holding now Yesh Zika. And therefore wait until we move the Zika. Let's say your older brother will perform Yibum. Forget about Yibum. Let's say he performs Chalitza, that's easier. That removes the Zika, and now you can go ahead and marry him. Or I should say marry her sister, I need to say. Omar Shmuel, and Shmuel takes the minority view and he paskins l'chumra like the minority view that if you marry the sister of the Ivama, then you have to wait until somebody fulfills the mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza, one of your other brothers, and removes the Zika, and only then can you consummate your marriage with the sister of the Ivama, with Leah. There were letters or even full verses, complete verses that were omitted from the Megillah. He read it by heart. Right? He was looking in the Sefer, he saw that there were words missing, and he read those words by heart. Yotza. So the Gemara says, Yotza Meisvei. We have a brisa that says, Hayuba Osios Metush Tachos Omekoros. Right? If the letters was smudged or they were ripped out, in Rishuma Mikar Kshera, the Imlav Psula. If you can still recognize the Osios, even though they're a little bit rubbed out or they're slightly ripped, then you can be Yotza. But in Lav Psula. And if you cannot recognize these letters, then it's possible. And now you're talking about a case where he omitted these letters. So if it's possible, even in the case of Metushtashos and Mekuros, how much more so in the case of Chiser, where he omitted Ishmael. He omitted these words. Lo kasha habakula habimiksasa. This is one of the most important Gemaras as far as halacha l'maisa is concerned. So the Gemara makes the following distinction to explain this price. If we're talking about a case of let's say miksasa, meaning there are missing words here and there, but most of the Megillah is there, then you can be Yotze. But if it's Kula, then you cannot be Yotze. And then the question is, what does the Gemara mean if it's Kula? If he can't read it, then he's reading it Bal Peh. And we've already established that Kor Bal Peh, Lo, Yotze. So he writes here in the name of the Turi Even that the Gemara doesn't mean that the Megillah is invalid if it's entirely illegible. That we know. If it's entirely illegible, then he's reading it Bal Peh. It's illegible. But rather, it means ro. So the word kula here means ruba. Most of the words of the Megillah are smudged up, are illegible, or ripped. That's considered that he's reading it Bal Peh, and lo yotz. But if it's miktasim, it's the minority of words. Let's say 49% of the Megillah is illegible. Then the Azlina Basaruba, it's as if he read the row, and that's enough. Again, he has to read the whole Megillah, but he'll fill in those words based on his memory, based on his knowledge, memorization. We learned in the Brisa, Hishmit ba hakore pasuk echad. If, let's say, as he's reading, he realizes that he left out a pasuk. Lo yomer, he shouldn't say ekra as kula. Let me complete the Megillah. V'achkach, when I finish it up, ekra, I'll go back to that pasuk, and that would be l'serigin lo yotza, out of sequence. Elakore, he goes back to that pasuk that he left out. They also pasuk v'elef. And even though he's read many other psukim, it doesn't matter. He's going to start from that pasuk that he omitted. Nichnas lebeis hakneses u'matzah tzibur shekra'o shekaru chetzia. He comes into the shul, and they've already read half of the Megillah. And now the question is, can he join the tzibur for the second half of the Megillah and fulfill his obligation? Why don't I just, listen to the Kriya of the Tzibur, the other half, and then go back to the first half? That he can't do, because once again, that would be l'seirig. Second. Sorry. That would be l'mafreya. Let's go back to the Mishnah. What was the language of the Mishnah? It was l'mafreya, am I right? Accidentally I said seirig. Scratch that. Also sofa means he has to go back to the beginning and read it in sequence. The Mishnah back on Daf Yud Zayin says that if he's falling asleep, he can still be yotze. And this question is relevant to many different areas of halacha. What is considered misnam? Amar of Ashi nim v'lo nim, tir v'lo tir. Asleep, not asleep. Is awake, not awake. Somewhere in the twilight zone, somewhere in the middle. And how do you judge that? L'maisa, the karole, if you mention his name, v'ani, he responds. However, his mind is not sharp. He can't give a response to a logical, analytic question. If you remind him of something, he remembers it. So this person is considered more awake than asleep. So he read the Megillah in this state of nim v'lo nim. He's half asleep. And what about a case where he hears the Megillah and he's half asleep? There's a gewaldige chiddush here of the Shulchan Aruch, the way the Mishnah Berurah understands it, that he read the Megillah in this half sleep state of nim v'lo nim tivur, and he's yotze. But if he's not the reader, but rather he's in the audience, he's in the tzibur, and he's listening. So hearing the Megillah in a state of nim v'lo nim v'tir, he's not yotze, because it's impossible that he didn't miss part of it. I find this in my experience challenging, because sometimes you come to hear the Megillah, whether it's at night or even the Megillah in the morning, if it's very early, you're half asleep, and you're not the reader. You find yourself like catching yourself. Oh, I missed that word. I was asleep. Hayakosva darsha umagia. If he's writing a Megillah, and it's time for the mitzvah Megillah, or he's interpreting a Megillah, or he is correcting the Megillah. Mishnah says it depends. Im kiven libo yotzam. Echidam. What's the case in the Mishnah? Either kavasadar psuka v'kasav law. Right? He's writing a Megillah. So every pasuk is like in his mind, and he's writing it down. Ki kiven libo ma'havi. If he read it to himself before he wrote it, how could he possibly be Yotze? Al Pelu, we said they karab al Pelu Yotze. El de Kasa Psuka Psuka. It must mean that first he wrote each pasuk down and then he read it. It's not that he read it before he wrote it, because that would be Malpeh, but rather he wrote it and then he read it. So the Gemara says, Umi Yotza. How can you entertain the possibility that he's Yotze if he writes it and then reads it? Halacha Divrei Omer Kula. We paskin, says Rav, like the Mandi Omer says that you have to read the entire Megillah. And this could be a machlokes in the next Mishnah on Daf Yutes between Rabbi Meir, who says that he has to read the entire Megillah. Rabbi Yehuda says it's enough that he reads from Ish Yehudi Hoya B'Shim Hoya Ish Yehudi Hoya, right? Shushan, etc. Whatever it says there in Perek Beis. So that's where he starts. And even according to the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, the next Mishnah, nevertheless, Tricha should take Suba Kula. Everybody agrees that it has to be written in its entirety from the beginning to the end. How much you have to read is a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, why does the Gemara assume that he didn't read the entire Megillah in entirety? Just let me say. Look, the Kasa Psuka Psuka, the curry. Second. Again, the Gemara said the Kasa Psuka Psuka the Karilit. So Umi Yotza, according to Rabbi Chelbo, in the name of Rav, how can it be Yotze when he has to read the entire Megillah? I think I understand. See? Oh, that's it. Now I got it. The Gemara is trying to prove Sricha Tehei Suva Kula. Meaning, whether I hold like Rabbi Meir that you have to read the entire Megillah from beginning to end, or like Rabbi Yehuda that you start in the second chapter with each Yehuda, both of them agree that it has to be written Kula. The entire Megillah has to be written. You don't have to read the entire Megillah according to Rabbi Yehuda, but it's got to be written in its entirety. So therefore, what's going on here? The Sofer is writing one pasuk, reading it, then he's writing another pasuk and reading it. His reading is worthless because he's not reading it from a Megillah. He's got to read it from Megillah, which is written in its entirety. Tzricha should take Suva Kula. Ella says the Gemara, the mancha Megillah kameh, v'kari le mina psuka v'kasavla. He has already a Megillah in front of him, and before he writes a pasuk in the new Megillah that he's writing, he looks at the Megillah, which is complete, and he recites each pasuk. He's Yotze. What's the chiddush here? If he's got a full Megillah in front of him, what's the hava meaning here that it should be Yotze? He's got a full Megillah in front of him. Mm-hmm. How are we doing on the clock here? We have a few minutes, right? What? 9:20. So I'm saying we're okay. So let me just see if in this Gemara he adds something because there's something missing. What's the chiddush? El de manche Megilla Kamei Unachas Megilla Cher with Measofer Korele Minei Psuka B'Kosav Lo Korimatik Menu Posuk Echad Posuk Achar Posuk Megilla Chadasha Ubov and Zem Karaso. Even if it's a yacht Zion. Oh, Baruch Hashem. He asks question. You know, Tana Shigam Mikra Serigin was Mana Shehia Hifse. Also Masechet. Excellent. Beautiful. He quotes this Asemis. I'm sorry, the Shivsei Chacham. Let me just share this. This is very, very good. Remember, we had a discussion about Serigin. And in the case of Serigin, there's a discontinuation, so to speak. There's a hefsek interruption in his kriya. This is a case of Serigin. Why? He's reading it from a full Megillah, but he's reading it after he writes each pasuk. So he's going to have to take a break after he reads one pasuk, write the next pasuk, and then read the next pasuk. So you'll ask me, we already established that Kara Serigin Yotza, unless he waits the entire time that you can read the whole Megillah. The answer is here it's a little tricky because he's not just interrupting and taking a break. You know, he's letting his mind wander from it. He's actually writing something between one pasuk and the next. So the kriya sandwiches a ksiva, and you might think that in this case Serigin lo yatsa because he did a ma'aseh ksiva. Very nice. Okay. Lema misayeh leila Rav Bar Chana. Right, now that we said that the Mishnah is talking about someone who copies a full Megillah, let's support Rabbi Bar Chana. The Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, also lichtov os achas shalom and aksa. Now, you don't write any of Kisvei Kodesh Baal Peh. You have to write it according to Rabbi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan from aksa. Because otherwise, we're not going to rely on your memory. So Gemara says that's not a proof. Dilma Isramile Isramuye. And Mishnah is talking about a case that he happened to read it from a Megillah. That's how he guaranteed that he would write it carefully. But it doesn't mean that then you have to write it in that way, like Rav. Kufa Omar Rav Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Also lichtov al sachas shalom and aksav meisvei. I assume Asya means Asia. Let's see how he translates this. He says Asya, so I'm assuming it's somewhere in Asia. I don't know. In any event, they went to be Ma'abra the Shana, Megillah. So he got stuck there on Purim, because usually Ibn Shana is in Adar, and there was no Megillah. This happened to me once in the army. When we had a Shaila, we could be in one camp at night where they had a Megillah, but then we wouldn't make it to the next camp in the morning where there was no Megillah. And we had another option where we could wait and go to the second camp in order to get Megillah in the daytime. So they passed across that we have to wait until tomorrow, and we weren't Yotzi at night because the Ikar Kriya is by day. Anyway, so what do? They didn't have Megillah. Savo milibo v'kra. And Rav Shimon Elazar wrote the Megillah and he read it. He wrote it Baal Peh. They didn't have a Megillah. I'm sorry, it was Rabbi Meir actually. So the Gemara answers, you know what? We don't trust the person's memory unless he's on the level of Rabbi Meir. Or Rabbi Abba, or Rabbi Avo, shiny Rabbi Meir. You can apply to Rabbi Meir the pasuk in Mishlei Demakayim Vei V'achapecha Yashiru Negdecha, and the pupils of your eyes shall look straight in front of you. What does that mean? Amalei Rabbi Bar Chamal Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yirmiyah Mitifti What does the pasuk mean? V'achapecha yashru negdecha. Amalo elu divrei Torah. This is a reference to divrei Torah. The chsiv bahu, and in Mishlei describing the Torah, it says, "Hata'if einecha bo ve'einen." Close your eyes and it's gone. One who closes his eyes even for an instant forgets his learning. So learning requires total focus and concentration. Even though it's so easy to forget the words of the Torah, but not in the case of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir knew the Torah by heart. That's what, Reb Chaim Volozhin was the Talmud Mufak of the Gaon. He said about his Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, that he knew the Torah backwards and forwards by heart. Backwards and forwards. Like somebody said to me, I want you to recite Ashvei backwards. I couldn't do. I said to him, give me a siddur. Now you're looking at the siddur, it's a cinch to read it backwards. But for the Gaon, he had Ashri in the apple of his mind, in his mind's eye. That's why he could read it backwards. That's called Kasri Aluach Livaya. Rav Chizdash Chayler Rav Hananel Davi Kosav Svarim Shalom Neksav. He was writing it without a text by heart. Amalei. Rav Chizda said to him, "Wait a minute. Who you call Torah Likase Al Picha?" You're right. You can write the entire Torah by heart. You know it all by heart. Let's not rely on your memory. Make sure you have a ksav and you're copying the ksav. So it means that Rabbi Hananel was on the same level as Rabbi Meir. For Rabbi Meir Kosa, we allowed Rabbi Meir to write a Megillah. He was stuck over there in a place called Asya, where they didn't have any Sfarim, so there were no Megillas available. So in that case, we're relying on his memory. But even if you have a photographic memory, you have to write it mitoch haksam. Abai shara l'debei bar chavu. He permitted the members of bar chavu l'michtav tefillah mezuz shalom neksav. Why would he do so? Keman, you're writing tefillah and mezuzahs from memory. Tana, because Abai accepted the shita of the Tan and the Brisa, the Brisa. Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer Mishum Rabbeinu Tefillin Mezuzas Nechtavo Shalom and Eksav. That although Sfarim cannot be written unless you're copying it from the text, but Tefillin and Mezuzas can be written by heart. And furthermore, the Ein Tzrichos Sirta. You don't have to make those lines in the clock. However, Hilchasa, we paskin, there's a difference between tefillin and mezuzahs. Tefillin ain't tzricha sirta, mezuzah tzricha sirta. In fact, most Rishonim hold that a sefer Torah like tefillin does not need sirta, only a mezuzah needs sirta. But both tefillin and mezuzah can be written by heart. My time of Nigras Garcina, because we know it well. We know the parshios, the tefillin, and mezuzah very well. The Mishnah says, "Hoisik besam besikra, etc., etc." Is lo yotza. Now the Gemara explains. Sam sama. He writes here in English, orpiment. Sikra, Omer Abba Barachana, sikrasa, really should be called sikrasa. And the English translation of this red dye called sikrasa is vermilion. That means anything to you? Oh yeah, you're familiar with it? Yeah. Oh, this is your specs. And kumos, kuma. Okay, it's a sap from a tree. Kankantum, chartadush pechai. A shoemaker's blacking. I guess it's a very black dye. Now, why is this black dye possible? The answer is because it cannot be erased. And the Gemara in Eruvin derives from the pasuk Kasav Umacha in the parsha of Sota that ink that's used for writing Kisvei Kodesh has to be erasable. Very interesting. It's like counterintuitive. Diphthera, it's diphthera that's being disqualified. The maliach ukamiach below office. It was salted and it was treated with a mixture of flour and water, but not treated with gallnuts. Niar machakom. Papyrus, I guess paper. I should take subashuris. Siv kiksavam ukizmanam. Ala sefer b'dio. We know it has to be written on parchment in blank ink. Asya ksiva ksiva. Ksiv hacham atiftov Esther hamalku. Uksiv hasam. Baruch mipiv. Okay, where's this pasuk? He tells you here it's in your Yirmiyahu. If I'm not mistaken, these are documents for the land ownership in Eretz Yisrael. Vayomer lahem baruch mipiv yikra Elias kol dvar me'elam ani kosev al sefer b'dio. From his mouth, he dictated to me all these words, and I wrote them on parchment with ink. So we see, based on this, that you need ink. It's got to be ala sefer b'dio. Okay, then so we're up to the Mishnah here on Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, which in Mirza Hashem will pick up on Zoom tomorrow. And this year, I think tomorrow will be a little bit later. I'll let you know what time, okay?
Are you doing this year on Sunday at noon? Sunday?
Sunday, I have that commitment. So if it's okay with you, I don't know if you could work this out. I would have this year at 8.
It's good for me.
Okay, so you're out the whole day anyway. So it's not relevant to Rabbi Road. So we'll have this year at 8.
Zoom?
I think on Zoom. Zoom is not good?
That's good. I'll dial in early. I'll be home at 8 o'clock.
Okay, great. Excellent. That's on Sunday. Right.